Daniel had wealth that most people could only dream of: luxurious mansions, sleek cars lined up like trophies, and enough money to last several lifetimes. Yet despite it all, he was miserable. What he craved couldn't be bought: genuine love. He was exhausted from meeting women who only saw him as a walking wallet, not as a man with a heart. One lonely evening, sitting in his vast but empty mansion, an idea sparked. What if he hid his wealth? What if he lived like an ordinary man? The thought thrilled him. He decided he would disguise himself as a taxi driver. No expensive suits, no flashy cars, just a man behind the wheel. If a woman could love him that way, then he'd know it was real. The very next morning, Daniel put his plan into action. He purchased an old, rattling taxi, a car so worn out it groaned every time it moved. Perfect, he thought. He swapped his designer suits for plain, everyday clothes that made him blend in effortlessly. Then he hit the streets, ready to live a life far removed from luxury. At first, it felt like an adventure. Daniel drove through busy markets, quiet neighborhoods, and crowded city roads, picking up all kinds of passengers. Some sat silently, staring out the window. Others chatted endlessly, filling the car with stories he didn't ask for. A few offered polite smiles, but they all had one thing in common: they never looked twice at him. To them, he was invisible, just another taxi driver. Then came Ayana. From the moment she stepped into his taxi, Daniel couldn't help but notice her. She was stunning, graceful, with a warm smile that felt genuine. For a while, he allowed himself to believe she was different. But it didn't take long for the truth to show. It started small. She asked him for a little help with her bills, and he obliged, thinking nothing of it. But soon, her requests grew larger, bolder. Ayana spoke sweetly, spun sad stories, and each time, Daniel handed over the money, not because he believed her, but because he wanted to see how far she'd go. And just as he feared, it became painfully clear: she didn't care for him at all. She only saw him as a means to an end, even though she believed he was just a taxi driver. Sitting alone one night, Daniel's heart sank. Was this what love had become? Were all women the same? For the first time, doubt crept in. Maybe no one would ever love him for the man he truly was. One late afternoon, with the sky painted in shades of gold and orange, Daniel spotted a young woman standing quietly by the roadside. She looked weary, as though the day had drained her, yet there was a calmness about her that caught his attention. She raised her hand to hail his taxi, and he instinctively pulled over. Her name was Zawadi. From the very first moment, Daniel sensed she was unlike anyone else he'd met. She didn't chatter endlessly or pry into his life. Instead, she sat in quiet thought, occasionally glancing out the window. When she finally spoke, her words were simple but meaningful. She asked about him. How was his day? What was it like driving a taxi? It wasn't much, but it felt real. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt seen, not as a driver, not as a rich man in disguise, but simply as himself. When they reached her stop, she smiled gently, handed him her fare, and thanked him sincerely. No hints, no requests, no games. Just gratitude. And as she walked away, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he had just met someone truly different. Daniel watched her walk away that evening, feeling an unfamiliar sense of peace, as though something deep within him had shifted. There was something special about Zawadi, something genuine that he couldn't ignore, and he found himself hoping she would call him again. Days passed, and she stayed on his mind, her quiet smile lingering like a memory he couldn't shake. Then, one busy morning, fate intervened. He spotted her walking along the crowded street and quickly pulled over. When she saw him, her face lit up, and she gladly accepted the ride. This time, their conversation flowed easily. Zawadi spoke about her life, how she worked tirelessly to support her family, and how, despite having so little, she found joy in the simplest things. Her contentment humbled Daniel, and for the first time, he felt himself drawn not to beauty or charm, but to a rare, unshakable authenticity. Daniel admired Zawadi for her humility and how she never asked for more than she needed. As they talked, he began to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maybe, just maybe, Zawadi could be the one. Still, he worried if she would feel the same if she knew who he really was, so he decided not to rush things. Over the next few weeks, he often picked her up, taking her to work or back home, and with every ride, their conversations grew deeper. Each time they spoke, Daniel felt himself falling for her more and more. One day, Daniel decided to test Zawadi, just like he had done with the other women before. He told her how hard it was to be a taxi driver and how little money he made, watching her closely for any sign of disappointment. But instead of frowning, Zawadi smiled gently and said that money wasn't everything, that what truly mattered was kindness, honesty, and love. Daniel's heart raced as he listened. He couldn't believe it. Here was a woman who didn't care about wealth. She cared about him. It was everything he had been searching for, and in that moment, Daniel knew it was time to tell Zawadi the truth, because he couldn't keep pretending forever. One evening after dropping Zawadi off, Daniel drove back to his mansion, thinking about how he would tell her the truth. He worried if she would be angry that he had lied, or if she would leave him once she found out he was rich. A few days later, he invited her to meet him at a small park. Nervous but determined, he took a deep breath when she arrived and told her everything. That he wasn't really a taxi driver, but a billionaire searching for true love. He watched her closely, waiting for her reaction, and to his surprise, Zawadi simply smiled and said she had fallen in love with the man, not his money. In that moment, Daniel's heart filled with joy because he had finally found what he had been searching for all along. Someone who loved him for who he truly was, not for what he had. Daniel and Zawadi kept seeing each other, and their love grew stronger every day. Daniel showed her his world of wealth and luxury, but Zawadi never changed. She stayed the same humble and kind woman she had always been. Daniel was excited to introduce her to his parents, who had met many women in his life before, but this time felt different. He was sure Zawadi was the one because she wasn't like the others who only cared about his money or status. She loved him for who he truly was, and that meant everything to him. One Sunday afternoon, Daniel took Zawadi to his family home, a grand mansion surrounded by high gates and beautiful gardens. Zawadi had never seen such a huge, luxurious place, but she stayed calm and didn't let it overwhelm her. Though nervous, her love for Daniel gave her courage, and she dressed modestly as always, which made Daniel smile with pride. As they drove there, he felt happy to have her by his side. When they arrived, his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, were waiting in the elegant living room, dressed in fine clothes that showed their wealth and status. They greeted Daniel with warm smiles, but as soon as their eyes fell on Zawadi, their faces changed, and though they said nothing, she could feel the coldness in the room. Daniel noticed the coldness too, but he didn't let it stop him. He proudly introduced Zawadi to his parents, speaking warmly about how kind and caring she was and how much she meant to him. He told them how they met when he was working as a taxi driver and how she had loved him even when she thought he had nothing. But as he spoke, his parents exchanged quiet, uneasy glances. When he finished, his mother, Mrs. Johnson, cleared her throat and spoke gently but firmly. "Daniel, we love you and want the best for you," she said. "But a girl like this Zawadi, isn't it? She's not from our world. She doesn't belong here." Daniel was shocked. He thought they might be surprised or need time to adjust, but he never expected such a harsh response. "What do you mean, mother?" he asked, confused and hurt. Daniel's father, Mr. Johnson, spoke next. "You are the heir to a great empire," he said firmly. "You need someone from a family like ours, someone who understands the life you live and the responsibilities that come with it. Zawadi comes from a poor background. She wouldn't know how to fit in." Zawadi sat quietly, listening to every word. Their words hurt, but she held her head high. She had never tried to be anything she wasn't, and she wasn't ashamed of where she came from. She knew her value, even if they didn't. Daniel was shocked and heartbroken. "You don't even know her," he said, trying to stay calm. "She's kind, she's strong, and she loves me for who I am, not for my money or name. Isn't that what truly matters?" But his mother simply shook her head, refusing to understand. "Love is not enough, Daniel," Mr. Johnson said firmly. "Marriage is about more than just feelings. It's about family, status, and making the right choices for your future. We have important connections and partnerships to protect. The woman you marry will represent our family, and while Zawadi may be a good person, she's not the right match for you." Daniel stood up, anger rising in his chest. "I didn't expect this from you," he said, his voice shaking. "I thought you'd be happy that I found someone who truly loves me, not for my money or name, but for me. But all you care about is how things look on the outside." Mrs. Johnson tried to calm him down. "Daniel, we're only thinking about your future," she said gently. "You need a wife who can support you, someone from the same world, someone who understands this life." But Daniel shook his head firmly. "I don't care about her background," he said. "Zawadi is the woman I love, and that's all that matters to me." He turned to Zawadi, who had stayed quiet through it all, and said gently, Let's go." Together, they walked out, ignoring his parents calling after him. Daniel was hurt, disappointed, and angry, but above all, he was sure of one thing. He wasn't going to let his parents' judgment destroy the love he had found. Zawadi was everything he had been searching for, and he wasn't going to lose her just because she didn't come from a rich family. Daniel and Zawadi stayed together, even though his parents still didn't approve. Weeks turned into months, and their love only grew stronger. Daniel loved Zawadi more with each passing day, and he had no regrets about choosing her over the wealth and status his parents wanted for him. But his parents, especially his father, Mr. Johnson, were not happy. Daniel had refused to leave Zawadi, and the more time he spent with her, the more upset they became. His father, who had always been proud of Daniel's role in the family business, felt hurt and betrayed. He believed he had given Daniel everything, and now his son was throwing it all away for a girl who, in his eyes, came from nothing. One evening, Daniel got a call from his father. The conversation was short but painful. "Since you refuse to listen to us," his father said coldly, "you will no longer have access to the family's wealth. You are no longer welcome in our home, and starting today, you are no longer part of the company. You're on your own." Daniel was shocked, but he stayed strong. He had known this might happen, and even though it hurt, he was ready to face whatever came next. His love for Zawadi was more important to him than money or power, and he knew he had made the right choice. With nowhere else to go, Daniel moved in with Zawadi. Her house was small and simple, nothing like the big mansion he had grown up in, but to Daniel it felt like home, because Zawadi was there. He was used to a life of comfort and luxury, but none of that mattered to him anymore. What mattered most was love, and as long as he had Zawadi by his side, he felt he could handle anything. At first, Zawadi did her best to stay strong. She loved Daniel deeply and wanted him to be happy, but it wasn't easy. The man she loved had once had everything: money, power, and respect, and now he had nothing. She could see that he was trying hard to adjust, but it broke her heart to see him struggle like this. Daniel started taking small jobs to help them get by. He worked at a construction site, carrying heavy concrete blocks for a small wage. The money was nothing compared to what he used to earn, but he didn't complain. For him, it was just part of the journey he was willing to take for love. But as the weeks went by, Zawadi began to feel the pressure of their new life. She had grown up with very little, so the simple lifestyle wasn't new to her. What really hurt was seeing Daniel, a man who once had everything, now working so hard just to survive. He had given up his entire world for her, and while she loved him deeply for that, the weight of his sacrifice was becoming too heavy for her heart to carry. One day, Zawadi opened up and told Daniel how she truly felt. After hearing her words, Daniel sat quietly, his heart heavy and his mind full of thoughts. He had given up everything and fought so hard for their love, and now she was asking him to go back to the life he had walked away from. The sadness in her voice and the tears in her eyes showed him that she was not happy, and that hurt him more than anything. She loved him, but it was hard for her to keep watching him struggle like this every day. Daniel tried to stay strong and hold on, but Zawadi kept bringing it up. It wasn't just once, she said it again and again, always with the same words. "You deserve better, Daniel. You don't belong here. You need to go back." After many sleepless nights and heavy thoughts, Daniel finally gave in. He couldn't bear seeing Zawadi so sad, and he didn't want their love to be the reason for her pain. So he decided to do what she asked. He would go back to his parents. But deep down, he was scared of what that would mean for them. The next day, Daniel went to his father's house. He hadn't spoken to him since the day he lost everything, and he didn't know how his father would react. But he felt like he had no choice. If Zawadi couldn't be happy with the life they were living, then he had to try something different. Mr. Johnson was sitting in his large office when Daniel walked in. He looked surprised but not shocked. He had always believed his son would return. Now that Daniel was standing before him, Mr. Johnson smiled with pride. "So, you finally came to your senses," he said, leaning back in his chair. Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of his choice. "I'm back, but I need your help," he said quietly. His father's smile grew wider. "Of course you do. You've learned your lesson, and now it's time to fix things. But there's something you must do. You know how important our family name is, and I've always made choices to protect our legacy," his father said firmly. "My best friend and I have always planned for our families to join. I want you to marry his daughter, Irina." Daniel felt his heart sink. He had feared this moment, but hearing it out loud made it worse. Irina was everything he didn't like, spoiled, loud, and always showing off her expensive things. She cared too much about status and not enough about real things. She was nothing like Zawadi, who was kind, simple, and full of love. "I can't marry her," Daniel said softly, hoping his father would understand. "She's not right for me." But his father's smile disappeared, and his voice turned firm. "You don't have a choice, Daniel. If you want to be part of this family again, you must marry Irina." Daniel agreed to his father's condition, to marry Irina, return to the family, and take back his place in the business empire. His future would be safe, even if his heart was not. That night, he went back to Zawadi's small house and told her everything. The decision was final, and the marriage was already being planned. Zawadi listened quietly, her eyes full of sadness. She had always known this day might come, but hearing it still hurt deeply. She was the one who had pushed Daniel to go back to his family, but a part of her had secretly hoped he would choose her instead. Their love had always faced challenges, and now it was clear that love alone wasn't enough to close the gap between their two very different worlds. Daniel and Zawadi's love story ended with heavy hearts. As planned, Daniel married Irina in a grand and luxurious wedding, just the way she had always dreamed. But while everyone else celebrated, Daniel felt empty inside. His heart still longed for Zawadi. After the wedding, Mr. Johnson insisted that Daniel and Irina live in the family mansion. This wasn't what Daniel had wanted. He had once told Zawadi that he wanted a simple life with no house helps, just the two of them. But now everything had changed. Irina was overjoyed to live in the mansion. The house was massive, filled with servants to meet her every need. There were beautiful gardens, a big swimming pool, and more rooms than she could count. It was everything she had ever wished for. She loved the luxury, the comfort, and the idea of not having to do anything for herself. But for Daniel, the mansion felt like a prison. It reminded him of how much he had lost, his freedom, his dreams, and the woman he truly loved. Now he was stuck in a life that felt nothing like his own. As time went on, Irina's real behavior started to show. Even though the mansion had many workers, Irina never wanted to lift a finger. She didn't cook, clean, or help with anything. Instead, she spent her days shopping, attending parties, and living her dream life. Mrs. Johnson, Daniel's mother, began to lose patience. She asked Irina to help with simple things, but Irina always had an excuse. She preferred a social life over responsibility. The house staff did everything while Irina relaxed. Daniel saw it all, but he felt stuck. He had lost Zawadi, his freedom, and now he was living in a big house with a woman who didn't care about the things that truly mattered. Meanwhile, Zawadi was dealing with heartbreak of her own. One day, she found out she was 4 months pregnant. She had no idea earlier because she was still seeing her monthly flow. The baby was Daniel's, and that truth hit her like a storm. She was scared and confused. Zawadi loved Daniel deeply, but she didn't want to ruin his new life. She didn't want to be the reason his marriage broke. So she kept the pregnancy to herself. She stayed silent, even though her heart was heavy. All she wanted was to protect her child from the pain and drama surrounding Daniel's new life. Every day, Zawadi carried the heavy weight of her secret like a stone in her heart. She told no one except a close friend, but even that confession felt dangerous. The thought of telling Daniel burned inside her, yet she smothered it with determination. She convinced herself that silence was love, that letting him go was the only way to protect him from more pain. Meanwhile, far away in the cold halls of the mansion, Daniel was drowning in emptiness. He couldn't shake the ache inside him, the feeling that something precious was missing. One restless night, he left without telling anyone and drove to the small neighborhood where they once shared laughter and dreams. But when he arrived, Zawadi was gone. No forwarding address. No number. Just an empty space where their love had lived. Standing in the street, Daniel felt the truth settle over him. He had lost her all over again. The mansion behind him wasn't a home. It was a golden cage, and every day inside it felt like punishment. Meanwhile, Zawadi fought an invisible battle. Her friend's words were sharp but true. "You can't hide this forever. He deserves to know." But Zawadi's heart refused. "If I tell him," she whispered, "I'll destroy what little peace he has left." She imagined Daniel's life, bound to Irina, tangled in business deals and family expectations. There was no place for her or their child in that world. So she chose silence, believing it was a shield for him, even if it pierced her own soul. At night, she lay awake, one hand on her growing belly, wondering if her child would ever know their father's face, or if Daniel would ever learn the truth that could change everything. Her friend's voice was sharp with worry. "Look at you, Zawadi. You're pregnant, with nothing to your name. No money. No home. How will you take care of a baby like this?" Zawadi's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed soft. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I have faith. I believe the Lord will provide for us. I can't rely on anyone else. Somehow we will be okay." Her friend shook her head, frustration clear on her face. "You can't just sit and wait for a miracle. You need real help, Zawadi. You need to think about your future and your child's." Zawadi took a deep breath, trying not to cry. "I know you don't understand," she said, "but this is my choice. I don't want to cause Daniel more pain. I have to believe we'll be all right." The words felt brave, but inside, her heart ached. She wanted Daniel to know. She wanted him to be part of their baby's life. But telling him meant breaking apart his new family, and she couldn't do it. When her friend left, the room felt even quieter. The secret inside her was heavy, but her faith was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Daniel's father planned a big fancy dinner, inviting his closest friends and business partners. The house was decorated beautifully, and every little detail was made to impress. But Daniel's mother had a secret plan. She wanted everyone, especially her husband, to see the truth about Irina. Even though the mansion had many cooks and maids, she told Irina she had to cook for the important guests herself. Irina had never cooked anything in her life, not even a simple meal. She wandered around the kitchen looking lost, while the staff, under Mrs. Johnson's strict orders, stood back and didn't help her at all. Feeling desperate to prove herself, Irina decided to make soup, something she had only seen in restaurants. She looked at the shelves, completely confused about what to use. In her panic, she grabbed a bottle of kitchen detergent, thinking it might be a special ingredient for flavor, and poured it into the pot. She tossed in too much oil, pepper, and salt, hoping it would taste fancy. Hours went by as she struggled. The kitchen became a disaster zone, pots everywhere, food spilled on the floor, and the smell of the soup growing stranger by the minute. Still, no one came to help. Daniel's mother stayed hidden, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal Irina's disaster to everyone. When the food was finally ready, the guests were called to the big dining table. Daniel's father sat proudly, thinking they were about to taste something amazing. Plates were placed in front of everyone, and the strong smell of the soup filled the room. But instead of a tasty aroma, it had a strange, sharp smell. The guests took their first spoonfuls, and it was a disaster. Their faces twisted, some coughed, and others quickly put down their spoons. The taste of detergent and too much seasoning was unbearable. Nobody could eat it. The happy, chatty mood of the dinner disappeared, and the air felt heavy with awkward silence. Daniel's father looked around in shock, unable to understand what had happened. One by one, the guests stood up, making weak excuses as they left. The dinner, which was supposed to impress important people, had turned into a total embarrassment. Furious, Daniel's father demanded to know who had ruined the food. He was ready to fire the cook immediately. But then Daniel's mother spoke up, her voice calm but sharp. "It wasn't the cook," she said. "It was Irina. She made the soup all by herself." The truth hit like a thunderclap, and all eyes turned to Irina. Daniel's father was stunned. He had always thought Irina was the perfect wife for his son, but now he saw the truth. She didn't know how to do even the simplest things, like cooking. She had no skills, no sense of responsibility, and no interest in learning. For the first time, he listened to his wife's warnings and realized she had been right all along. The fancy dinner he had planned to impress his guests had turned into a shameful disaster, all because of Irina. The woman he believed would bring pride to the family had instead embarrassed them in front of everyone. His respect for her began to fade, replaced by disappointment. Irina, on the other hand, felt humiliated. She had wanted to shine that night, but had ended up showing everyone her weaknesses. Days went by, and Daniel barely spoke to her. He stayed out of the house as much as possible, while she stayed in the mansion, surrounded by luxury but feeling completely alone. The distance between them grew heavier each day. One evening, unable to take it anymore, Irina confronted him. She asked why he didn't act like her husband, why he avoided her, why he never touched her or showed any love. Her voice was sharp, but deep down, she was scared of the answer. Daniel had stayed quiet for too long, but now he was done. He looked straight at Irina, his voice firm and cold. He told her the truth. He had never wanted to marry her. Their marriage was nothing but a deal between families, made for business and status, not for love. His heart had never been hers, and it never would be. The words hit Irina like sharp knives, cutting deep into her pride. Daniel didn't soften his tone. He told her he didn't love her, didn't want her, and wasn't going to pretend anymore. Then he ordered her to leave his father's house and never come back. Irina's face burned with shock and rage. All her life, she had been spoiled and admired, always getting whatever she wanted. No one had ever dared to reject her, until now. The humiliation was unbearable. Her hands shook with anger as she grabbed her phone and called her father. In a furious voice, she told him everything. How Daniel had insulted her, refused to be with her, and thrown her out like she was nothing. Her father, a proud and powerful man, was enraged. His voice turned to steel as he promised this insult would not be ignored. The next day, Irina's father stormed into Daniel's father's office without even saying hello. He sat down, his eyes cold, and delivered a sharp threat. If Daniel left Irina, he would take all his business away. Every deal, every contract, every penny tied to their partnership would be gone. He said his daughter's honor was at stake, and if the marriage ended in shame, so would their business. Daniel's father felt his stomach twist. He knew what this meant. Their companies were so connected that losing Irina's father's support would destroy everything. The empire he had spent years building would fall apart in weeks, leaving nothing but ruins. Realizing how serious things had become, Daniel's father quickly apologized to Irina's father. He promised this would never happen again and assured him that Daniel would remain with Irina. The last thing he wanted was to lose such a powerful partner in the business world. Daniel's father knew he had to keep the peace, even if it meant sacrificing his own son's happiness. Irina's father accepted the apology, but his trust was cracked. He warned that he would not stand for any more disrespect toward his daughter. With that, he left the office, certain the marriage would continue and that Daniel would not be allowed to walk away so easily. Back at the mansion, Daniel's father called his son and made it clear. This marriage was no longer just about love. It was about business, power, and the family's future. Daniel, trapped between his father's orders and his own misery, realized he had no choice but to stay. Irina, proud that her father had stepped in, felt she had won. She believed Daniel would now be forced to stay by her side. But deep in her heart, she knew the truth. No matter how many threats or deals were made, Daniel's heart would never belong to her. One sunny afternoon, Daniel's mother decided to take a quiet trip to the local market. She loved the fresh smell of fruits and vegetables, the chatter of the vendors, and the freedom of being away from the mansion's endless drama. As she strolled past colorful stalls, her eyes suddenly froze on a familiar face, Zawadi. She stood by a small stall, her belly round and heavy with pregnancy. Daniel's mother's heart skipped a beat. Zawadi didn't just look pregnant, she looked tired and worn. Her dress was loose and faded, her hair untidy, and her face carried the marks of hard days and sleepless nights. Daniel's mother slowly walked up to her, unsure where to start. They stood face to face, the air thick with old memories and unspoken pain. At last, Daniel's mother whispered an apology, saying she had never wanted things to end this way. She told Zawadi she had wished for her and Daniel to be together, but now, seeing her pregnant, she thought it was with another man's child. Zawadi shook her head gently, her voice calm but firm. "These are Daniel's babies," she said. "Twins, a boy and a girl." In that moment, Daniel's mother's shock turned into something else entirely, a mix of guilt, hope, and the knowledge that a secret this big could change everything. Daniel's mother could hardly believe the words she had just heard. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness but from joy. She had always dreamed of holding her first grandchild, and now she was learning there would be two twins, Daniel's own children. But as her gaze moved over Zawadi, her joy was mixed with worry. She could see the exhaustion on her face, the faded clothes hanging loosely on her body, and the quiet struggle in her tired eyes. Without a second thought, Daniel's mother told Zawadi she was taking her home, no arguments. As they drove, she noticed how small and worn Zawadi's neighborhood looked, her concern growing with every turn of the road. When they arrived, Daniel's mother's heart sank. The apartment was tiny and dim, the walls lined with cracks, the furniture sagging with age, and the air heavy and stale. It was no place for a woman carrying twins. She stood silently, her chest tight with guilt, wondering how Zawadi, the mother of her future grandchildren, had been left to live like this without anyone knowing. Zawadi shifted uncomfortably, clearly embarrassed, but Daniel's mother didn't judge her. Instead, her eyes hardened with resolve. There was no way she was going to let this continue. Things were about to change, starting that very moment. Daniel's mother owned 5 houses scattered across the city, far more than she needed, and she didn't hesitate for a second. Zawadi would move into one of them immediately. She chose a grand mansion, far from the noise and struggles of the poor neighborhood. "Pack your things," she told Zawadi firmly, and within an hour, the tiny apartment was left behind. When they arrived, Zawadi was speechless. The house was enormous, with green gardens that stretched like a park, wide sunny rooms, and everything she could ever imagine needing. Daniel's mother even assigned her a maid to help with daily chores and a driver to take her anywhere she wished. She knew carrying twins would be hard and wanted Zawadi to have nothing but comfort. Placing a gentle hand on Zawadi's shoulder, Daniel's mother told her to rest and take care of herself. No more struggle, no more hunger, no more loneliness. If Zawadi needed anything, she was to call her directly. In her heart, Daniel's mother felt both joy and regret. Joy because her first grandchildren were on the way, and regret because of the pain Zawadi had endured to get here. As Zawadi settled into her new room, she felt a wave of peace wash over her. After months of hardship, she finally had a safe place. She hadn't expected such kindness from Daniel's mother. But with the twins growing inside her, it felt like a blessing she couldn't turn away from. On the drive to the mansion, Zawadi felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, her life was starting to change for the better. But deep inside, she couldn't stop wondering how Daniel would react when he learned the truth about the twins. After settling Zawadi into the grand home and making sure she had everything she needed, Daniel's mother made a bold decision. She would keep it all a secret. She didn't tell her husband. She didn't tell Daniel. She wanted to wait until the babies were born to reveal the truth. Just thinking about surprising her son with the news that he was about to be the father of twins filled her with a happiness she hadn't felt in years. For the next few weeks, Daniel's mother visited Zawadi often. She would sneak out in her own car so no driver could follow and no one would suspect a thing. Each visit made her smile even more. She checked on Zawadi's health, made sure the staff treated her kindly, and spent hours talking about the babies. This secret became her light in a dark time. She had been weighed down by Irina's selfishness and the shame her daughter-in-law had brought to the family. But now she had something pure to hold on to, a future filled with joy. She could already imagine the day the twins would be running through the house, their laughter filling the halls, and she couldn't wait to hold them in her arms. One evening, after watching his mother slip out again and return with a glowing smile, Daniel's curiosity finally took over. As they sat together in the living room, he gently asked why she seemed so happy lately. Where was she going alone without her driver? And what had changed her mood so much? His mother, caught off guard, smiled softly. She looked at her son, fully aware of the real reason for her joy, but she wasn't ready to tell him. Instead, she calmly said that nothing was wrong. She was simply enjoying spending more time by herself. She assured Daniel there was no need to worry, and that everything was perfectly fine. Daniel nodded, but wasn't fully convinced. This sudden change in his mother's behavior didn't feel normal. Still, he decided not to press further, letting the matter drop for now. His mother, meanwhile, kept her secret close. She wanted the birth of the twins to be a grand surprise, a moment that would light up Daniel's face and bring joy back into the family. She imagined her husband's shock when he learned he was a grandfather, and the happiness Daniel would feel when he held his children for the first time. Until then, she continued visiting Zawadi, helping her prepare for the babies, and savoring the peace this hidden joy brought her. She knew that soon everything would change, but she was happy to wait for the perfect moment. 2 weeks later, the moment everyone had been waiting for finally came. Zawadi gave birth to twins, a beautiful baby boy and a beautiful baby girl. The labor was long and hard, but the second she held them in her arms, all the pain seemed to disappear. They were tiny, perfect miracles, and Zawadi's heart overflowed with love. Daniel's mother was just as overjoyed. When Zawadi called to share the news, her heart nearly burst with happiness. Her grandchildren had arrived safely, and she couldn't wait another second to see them. Right away, she decided to visit the hospital, but she wanted Daniel to be surprised. That morning, she casually told Daniel she was going to visit a sick friend in the hospital and asked if he would come along. Still curious about her recent happiness, Daniel agreed. They drove in silence, his mind racing with guesses, though none came close to the truth. When they arrived, Daniel followed his mother through the long hospital hallway. Her steps were quick, her excitement barely hidden. Daniel, a little confused, had no idea what was waiting for him on the other side of that door. But he was about to find out. As they stepped into the room, Daniel froze in shock. There was Zawadi, sitting up in bed, cradling two tiny newborns in her arms. His heart pounded as he turned to his mother, searching for answers. With tears in her eyes, she told him everything. How she had found Zawadi pregnant at the market, how she had secretly taken care of her, and how these babies, right in front of him, were his children. Daniel's legs felt weak. Slowly, he walked toward Zawadi, his eyes locked on the little faces that were a perfect mix of him and her. Tears spilled down his cheeks as the truth hit him. He was a father. Not just to one baby, but to twins. And their mother was the woman he had loved all along, the woman he thought he had lost forever. The emotions rushed over him like a wave. He knelt beside Zawadi, his voice shaking as he apologized for everything, for leaving her, for the pain she had gone through, for not being there when she needed him most. But Zawadi, with her gentle heart, told him there was no need to apologize. She understood, and she didn't blame him. All she wanted now was for them to move forward as a family. Daniel took the tiny hands of his children, feeling the warmth of their skin and the weight of his responsibility. Then he kissed Zawadi's forehead, promising her that from this moment on, he would make everything right. The day Zawadi and the twins left the hospital, Daniel knew he couldn't keep the secret from his father any longer. He wanted him to meet the grandchildren he never knew existed. Driving home, Daniel's mind raced, wondering how his father would react. When he arrived, he found his father in the study, as always, buried in paperwork. Nervous but determined, Daniel told him they needed to check something at one of his mother's mansions. At first, his father dismissed it as another distraction, but Daniel didn't give up. He kept insisting it was important, and finally, his father agreed to go. They drove in silence, the air thick with curiosity, until they reached the mansion. When they stepped inside, Daniel's father still had no idea what was waiting. But the moment they walked into the living room and saw Zawadi sitting on the couch holding two tiny babies, everything stopped. The twins were sleeping peacefully, wrapped in soft blankets. Daniel turned to his father, his voice gentle but full of feeling. "Daddy, you are now a grandfather to two beautiful babies." The words hit him like a wave. His mouth fell open, his eyes filled with tears. He stepped closer, staring at the twins in awe. Back when he and Daniel's mother were younger, he had always dreamed of having twins of his own, but it never happened. Now, that dream had come true in a way he never expected. Now, in front of him, were two perfect little grandchildren, and Daniel's father felt emotions rushing through him like a flood. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he walked over to Zawadi, his heart heavy with both joy and regret. He gently touched one of the baby's tiny hands, then looked at Zawadi with eyes full of sorrow. He apologized, his voice trembling, for all the pain she had endured, for forcing her out of Daniel's life, for leaving her to struggle alone while carrying his grandchildren. The guilt was almost too much to bear. He admitted how wrong he had been and promised that from this moment on, she would be part of their family. Zawadi, holding her babies close, accepted his apology with grace. She could see the truth in his words, and though the past had been painful, all she wanted now was peace and a better future for her children. Irina had always been sharp-eyed, even if she wasn't deeply involved in Daniel's life or close to his parents. Lately, she had begun to notice something strange. Daniel, who had grown distant from her, was suddenly leaving the house often, and not alone. His parents, who had once lived quiet lives at home since their retirement, were now going out almost every day, often with Daniel. At first, Irina brushed it off, thinking they were just visiting friends or attending family events. But as the days passed, her curiosity turned into suspicion. No one ever told her where they were going. Every outing was kept secret, and everyone acted as if there was something they didn't want her to know. The mystery gnawed at her, and she became determined to find out the truth. Daniel's coldness toward her was something Irina had grown used to, but now it felt like even his parents were shutting her out. She tried to ask Daniel about it once, slipping the question into a casual conversation, but he brushed her off with a quick, "There's nothing to worry about." His parents were no better, giving her polite smiles but no answers. It was as if the three of them were keeping some big secret, and she was the only one not allowed to know. The silence ate at her. Their marriage had always been more of a business deal than a love story, but now Irina felt a new kind of sting, the feeling of being completely excluded. Frustrated and desperate for answers, Irina turned to the one person she thought might talk, the family's longtime security man. One afternoon, she caught him alone by the gate and started pressing him for the truth. At first, he refused, remembering Daniel's father's warning never to tell her anything. But Irina didn't back down. She pushed and pushed until, under the weight of her relentless questions, he finally gave in. His words cut through her like a blade. Daniel, along with his parents, had been visiting Zawadi. And not just Zawadi, but Daniel's twin children. The truth hit Irina like a storm. Daniel had 2 babies with the woman he had once loved, and they had all been keeping it from her. The security man begged Irina to forget everything he had just said, reminding her that Daniel's father had ordered her to be kept in the dark about Zawadi and the twins. But it was too late. The truth was out, and Irina was shaking with rage. Her frustration and jealousy boiled until they spilled over. She felt betrayed, humiliated, and furious that everyone, even Daniel's parents, had chosen Zawadi over her. Without thinking, she stormed back into the house, her mind racing. The shame of it burned inside her. How could Daniel do this? How could his family accept Zawadi and her children while pretending she didn't matter? Her hands trembling, Irina grabbed her phone and called her father. The moment he answered, she poured out everything in a rush of anger. She told him about Daniel's affair, the twins, and how his parents had been secretly visiting Zawadi behind her back. Her voice cracked with hurt, but her words were sharp with fury. On the other end of the line, her father listened in stunned silence before his own anger ignited. He couldn't believe his daughter had been treated this way, humiliated and excluded. In that moment, he made up his mind. He wasn't going to let this insult to his family pass without a fight. Immediately, Irina's father called Daniel's father, his voice sharp with rage. He shouted that their business partnership was over and that he was pulling out of every deal they shared. He couldn't believe his daughter had been treated with such disrespect. But Daniel's father was unmoved. He had seen through Irina's spoiled, selfish ways, and with his grandchildren now in his life, his priorities had shifted. Calmly, he told Irina's father that Daniel was done with Irina. They didn't need the partnership, the money, or anything else from him. Then he ended the call without another word, leaving Irina's father in stunned silence. He had expected an apology, maybe even a desperate plea to save the partnership. Instead, he had been met with cold rejection, and the realization hit him hard. His daughter had lost her marriage, and they had lost all the power they once had over Daniel's family. Back at Daniel's house, the air was heavy. Later that day, Daniel's father returned home, his expression set in stone. He called Irina into the living room and, without a trace of hesitation, told her it was time to leave. The words struck her like a slap. She just stood there, frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. She had expected him to defend her, to take her side. But instead, he told her plainly that her place in the family was over. He had endured her spoiled ways long enough, and after everything that had happened, she no longer belonged here. She had no children, no love, no real bond with them, nothing to keep her in this house. His final words were firm. It was time for her to go. Irina, humiliated and defeated, had no choice but to pack her things. She moved through the house like a shadow, gathering her belongings without saying a word. She had always believed she was untouchable, that her father's money and influence could shield her from anything. But now, even that protection was gone. With her bags in hand, she walked out of the house that had never truly felt like hers. Back at her father's mansion, the walls felt colder, the rooms emptier. She had lost her marriage, her status, and her pride. Everything she had clung to had fallen apart, leaving her with nothing but her anger and the hollow comfort of wealth that suddenly felt meaningless. Meanwhile, at Daniel's home, a quiet peace began to settle. His parents felt lighter, relieved to finally be free from the tension Irina had brought. Now they could turn all their attention to what really mattered: their family, their grandchildren, and the love that had been rekindled between Daniel and Zawadi. The house, once filled with secrets and bitterness, now overflowed with hope, laughter, and joy. The future no longer felt uncertain. It felt like a fresh chapter, waiting to be written with love. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this story. Kindly subscribe, like, comment, and share my video with your loved ones. Turn on your notification bell to always be informed whenever I post another interesting video like this one. Until next time, take care.